You're listening to the Adventurous Weirdos podcast by Watcher DM. Learn more at watcherdm.com or come join our Patreon at patreon.com/watcherdm. Stay weird. Hey, Austin.
Hey, Gabe.
How you doing, bud?
I'm doing really well today. It's a beautiful day here on the sunny beaches of Canada,
So gorgeous.
where it's always spring break.
Yeah, we went for a walk today and expecting frosty nipples, and it wasn't. It was
No,
nice and medium temperature nipples.
this is what do they call it? Fool's Autumn, where they try and lull you into a false sense of security before the rain comes.
Wow. Before they try and drown you like a cat.
Mm-hmm. What are we talking about today?
Yeah, good question.
Here on the Adventurous Weirdos podcast, episode 3.
Yeah, welcome to the Adventurous Weirdos podcast. I'm Gabriel Hernandez.
I'm Austin Holm.
We're Watcher DM
Mm-hmm.
and Quest Giver Games Limited. We make tabletop role-playing game products and ideas sometimes.
Yes.
In case you don't know. So welcome if you're new. If you've been here before, thanks for coming back, I guess.
Yeah.
Like, I hope you're addicted.
You're one of the rare ones, and we appreciate it.
Yeah. Today, we have a bit of an agenda.
Yes.
We want to talk about kind of travel. I think travel and like exploration as a mechanism, but what the actual mechanics are that are available, and then how we approach those, I think. So categorical buckets of like hex crawl, point crawl, dungeon crawl.
Oh, okay, interesting.
Are kind of ways to explore I think a place. And then that got me thinking about maybe we could talk about ways to explore a story. Is there like a scene crawl?
That's interesting.
Or a plot crawl?
Let's get into all that. Let's start by saying, I think exploration is, to me, probably the most important of the three. You know, people say combat, exploration, and socialization are kind of the three pillars of the game.
Yeah.
Sometimes people throw in a fourth pillar to be smart.
But what's the fourth pillar?
I don't know. I think it varies depending on who's trying to be smart at
rolling
the time.
Dice. Oh, okay.
Yeah, you know.
The fourth pillar is dice collection. That's
materialism.
Yeah.
Get it while it's hot.
Yeah.
But to me, I think exploration is my favorite pillar. I think it's probably one of the more important ones, and I think it's underserved.
I think, well, arguably, everything in the other pillars has the potential to offer exploration.
Yeah.
Like, okay, stupid, kind of contrived example, but like the first time you're experiencing a monster in combat,
sure,
that is an exploration of the space, right, of the description of the monster. Now, you could have a shitty DM who's like, oh, there's 3 trolls.
Yeah.
We've never seen a troll before.
Yeah.
Describing the monster that is the troll, describing that first time that you slash at them and their wounds begin to heal, that's a magical exploration moment that combat delivers.
Yeah.
The social pillar is, I think, in many ways the same. There's nothing that you're going to get out of a social experience in Dungeons and Dragons that shouldn't be related to exploring or learning something about the world or the person.
Yeah, you're gaining
and the world by virtue of that person. So yeah, I think realistically, tabletop role-playing games are exploration games.
I think they should be,
with
combat
and social mechanisms on top.
But if you pick up the book, it's very much like if you pick up the D&D, like the PHB for 5th edition, it's like, here's character creation, here's combat, and then the exploration rules are like, here's like half of them, and the rest are in the DMG. Don't really worry about it too much, like.
Well, and I think I actually think that's on purpose, and I think that the intention there, and maybe being a little bold, speaking for the authors, I think Mike Merles and Perkins,
they don't have a platform to speak for themselves, so I think we have to do it for them.
Yeah, these guys don't get enough attention, enough time on screen.
Yeah, right. It's hard being successful.
I think, to their credit, I think potentially the tools available to the players largely come down to combat tools.
Yes.
And so it makes sense that the player's handbook would focus on tools and the rules of using combat tools. Whereas exploration, there's not a lot of tools available to players that are on their character sheet for working through exploration.
Yeah.
But all of the rigor of how exploration works is in the DM. It's how the DM tracks time. It's how he tracks movement, and it's how he tracks resources.
Random
It's how he
encounters.
forces the players to acknowledge that attrition of time and resource,
Hmm.
as they explore. And I think that, like, first of all, as much as I just gave credit for them not putting something in a book because I'm an asshole like that, uh, putting what they did put in the Dungeon Master's Guide is weak, extreme, like to the extreme. I think it poorly organized, and I don't think anybody will argue that the Dungeon Master's Guide 2014 is a poorly organized book.
Yeah.
Um, but kind of again, like if you look at the structure of that book,
Hmm.
what's the first thing it's talking about? Right? It's world building. It's domain stuff. It's like how do the gods work? How do the
Yeah.
planes work? How does all this stuff work?
What is politics?
What is politics, right? And like, to me, that is kind of giving the clear signal to the dungeon master that a lot of what you're going to be doing in this game is establishing a visceral world that your players need to explore.
Hmm.
Now, it'd probably be better to start with, here's how you can run
You
the
just had to
the
play
game,
the game.
your side of the game, in terms of explaining the scene,
Yeah.
and like, I think one of the, probably something we'll see in the upcoming DMG, but you see it in Matt Colville's stuff and in other stuff. It's like clear definitions of like the different types of things you can do as a DM, doing a camera shot, just describing a scene as a camera shot from far away, from a
Hmm.
different time, from another person's perspective. Those are all powerful tools in the DM's arsenal of setting the stakes, establishing what's going on in the story. If that's the kind of game you're playing, again, that's like exploring a story. If your objective is exploring a space, you have a very different role of kind of peeling back the layers of what the players see and hear and feel in that really kind of three-dimensional sense,
Hmm.
and then having them poke and prod at the world to kind of explore more, which I think is where we get into like the hex crawl. uh you know
Do we hex crawl? Do we point crawl? Do we?
right.
Well, let's talk about that. So like, what do you like? We've done a bunch of different ways through the games that we've made. Like Long Bear Valley, we did is a nice little hex crawl, which I'm very proud of personally. I think it's a very solid entry in our 5e's 2-page stuff.
I agree. I will say that the rules for getting lost in that are draconian.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
you're thinking specifically, I think, of the Troika version that we
right,
whipped up.
right.
You were
And if
saying,
you're not playing, if you don't have those tracking or navigation tools,
hmm,
you're going to be at a loss a
yeah,
lot of the time. But even as such, like, given the 20 hexes that are there,
yeah,
becoming lost more than once and backtracking and trying to figure out where you are, um, it's challenging.
yeah,
Is it, depending on the player, that can be a really good thing.
hmm,
I think some players
respond.
respond to that and go like they get it.
Yeah.
Those players probably have been lost at least once.
Yeah.
It's a lot scarier getting lost in Long Bear Valley than getting lost in a mall.
Depends on the mall, I think.
Depends on the mall. That's
Yeah,
true. We've been
it's
to.
Crystal Gate's pretty rough these days. Uh, but yeah, I think it's interesting because there's kind of this conception of like, oh, we've got our adventuring party, we've got our guy who hits stuff, we've got our guy who casts spells, we've got our healer, we've got our lock pick and thief, and
Mhm.
I like the inclusion of like, well, do like do you have somebody who can get you through the woods? Like, it's one of the things I think Lamentations does kind of interesting is because they do race as class halflings. You've got to kind of carve out a halfling role that
Mhm.
is distinct from a rogue or a specialist in Lamentations. And the way they did that by going, yeah, these hobbits, halflings, whatever, they're in touch with nature. That's what they're good at. They will get you where you're going,
Bushwhacking.
bushwhacking. They're good in forests. They can hide well. They can forage well. They don't get lost. Like, I think that's a very interesting kind of like, what's this class about? This class is about exploration.
Right. And I think that like the when you look at the four base classes
Mm-hmm.
of Dungeons and Dragons, the fact that they are all kind of categorically assigned with
Combat
combat
utility.
combat utility, right? So exactly, you've got the tank
Yeah.
warrior, right, can take the hits, usually the barbarian,
Mm-hmm.
or what a high armor class armor wearer. You got the striker, it's your and actually you've got two strikers in a sense, because your rogue and your wizard both offer
Yeah.
kind of striker.
Which is
um
interesting though, because rogue is kind of almost half of an exploration. Like it's like, how do we get through this door? Well, only one of us has the door thing. How do we climb?
right,
We
no, you
gotta
definitely
climb
see
there.
it, like there are vestiges of exploration in the other classes.
Mm-hmm.
And like, if you kind of peel that back and look at like the greater canon of traditional 5e classes, the ranger is the exploration
Yeah.
warrior class. um but like, speak with animals, druid,
Yeah.
speak with dead, cleric. The fact that a wizard can, I think, arcane eye is one of those spells. It's kind of like, okay, do some reconnaissance, do some exploration. Like, there's tools like throughout the game, and I think that but again, I think that the fact that they're so limited, and that they're like little secrets that you learn.
Yeah.
Like, as a player, you're like, oh, I got Goodberry.
Yeah.
Like, we just solved a
Foraging.
category of problems
Yeah.
with food. And like, as a DM, not taking advantage of the time before they had Goodberry, or
Yeah.
what I'm saying, like, not exposing them to the risks of a world in which you will die from hunger or exposure.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of the caveat. Is like, if you want to do a really good hex crawl exploration game that has resource management and attrition in it, you have to buy in to exposing your players to a world where their story literally doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
If they sat there and did nothing, they would die in a few weeks at least, or a few days if they drank no water,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or just from exposure in a day and a half, right? Like, because the world is
Trying
it's
to
not
kill
just
you.
trying to kill you. Like, it doesn't care.
Yeah.
It's big enough to not give a shit, and everything in it will treat you as food, or
Or a
or
threat.
incident, yeah, just completely incidentally run over you.
Yeah.
And like, that is a hard world to tell a heroic story in, if your objective is telling a heroic story. And I think that's what 5e has been kind of
Angled
ratcheted
towards.
towards.
That's interesting.
And I only say that because that's the campaign books that have come out for it. So if you look at, you know Descent into Avernus,
Mm-hmm.
or I think Ghosts of Saltmarsh probably has the least of that flavor in it. There's some good stuff in Rime of the Frost Maiden as well, that's
Mm-hmm.
like, kind of, good luck. Like,
Yeah.
the world will fucking shit on you and eat you.
Tomb of Annihilation is a little bit in that. I know they got some heat for the ridiculous kind of, you know, poor signposting to the dungeon, in people's opinion. I don't know. And hard random encounter tables kind of is just a meat grinder before you even get to where you're going.
Which ironically is very in line with that exploration pillar that you see from OSR style
Yeah.
games, classic dungeon adventures. And I think when the fact that they redid that, and we're like, okay, Tomb of Horrors, or Tomb of Annihilation is, we're redoing Tomb of Horrors, we're putting it in Chult, and here's
Yeah.
some terrifying stuff. And then what happened with that, right? DMs didn't love it,
Mm-hmm.
and for reasons that have a lot to do with, they were just basically told, okay, here's the hex crawl, learn how to
Go.
figure out how to run it.
Yeah.
uh, Again, not front and centered in the book, not really declared as like, this is the important characteristic of this game. So I'm sure DMs largely felt unsupported
Mm-hmm.
in running that, and then up against players who have all these combat tools
Mm-hmm.
and are like, well, what do you mean we're out of resources?
Yeah.
I need to pick
Who
up
do
more
I punch
rations.
to get food?
Exactly.
Um,
So,
I
not
just
surprising that it wasn't popular.
To me, I feel like there's so many things in D&D that are so hung on the exploration. Like rust monsters, for example. We were talking about rust monsters the other day.
You've been threatening us with rust monsters.
I'm going to continue to until Storm and Norman, the Dwarven Dorman, dies a horrible death. The threat of rust monsters will continue.
Oh, don't make that face. We know you want him to die.
Yeah, my wife's got a language character, a language specialist. She wants to break out. Her dwarf's getting increasingly suicidal. But like, if you're doing the like, oh, like, the innkeeper wants you to kill rats in his basement. So we go down the stairs of the inn, and there's the rats, and we kill them, and then there's a door, and we go through that, and oh, here's a rust monster. And now my armor's screwed up, and I go back up top, and I get new armor. That's low stakes. It's silly. Nobody cares. If you are 20 days out into the wilderness, you're 20 days away from town, and a rust monster eats your armor, I think that's a really, really interesting kind of like game scenario where you're like, oh, geez, like my AC is damaged. Do we keep going into this dungeon? Do we go back? Like, I'm going to be exposed to random encounters on the way. Like, especially in games like Lamentations, where your armor class is so much of your survivability. Like, plate mail is just.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think items in general being critical to that. We just experienced that in our Lamentations game.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
Barhag,
Your wagon and your horses got et.
yeah, there was a giant who came through, and we had barely got away from him, but not without him taking out our pack animals,
No,
our driver, our animal handler,
R.I.P.
and yeah, we didn't even name
We
him.
didn't name that guy. He had a name.
Actually, he might.
Nobody asked
Now
him.
that I think about it, I think the retainer feature in OSR Beyond might just
Might
give
have
them a
named
name
him.
automatically, so
Yeah.
it might have named him automatically.
There you go. Nobody asked is the important thing.
Yeah, but yeah, and like scattered our junk to the wind, and God knows if we have it, but we certainly have no way back home now. Like, we're gonna have to travel by foot, and we don't have the resources to do it. We have whatever rations we were able to retain, but
it's going to be dicey.
It's going to be dicey. It's going to be a lot different than the way out there, and we're effectively treating this castle that we've kind of battered our way into, that tried to kill us,
Yeah,
as a safe place.
Yeah.
And like, it's not.
No, it wants you dead.
Yeah, I think that's kind
slightly
of a cool,
less than outside, I think.
Yeah, I think that's really, it was a cool way to end the session. The only thing that I'm worried about with it is that last time we ended, like, we have never, I think, up to this point, ended a session outside of town.
Yeah.
And so there's really kind of this risk. Like, I think the normal way to do that is to like roll. Like, how did you make it?
How did you make it back to town? I have a table for that.
Yeah.
That I've threatened you all with a couple times, but I think we'll pick it up where we left off.
Okay.
But,
I'd be interested in running into that table. I would be interested in seeing how it goes down. So I think some of us may make it and some of us may not. And it'd be funny to kind of fast forward that and just be like, well, sorry, Norman. So we had to eat you for resources on the way home.
I was promised a high lethality, low PC survivability game by James Raggy, and all my players are still alive. Come on, what's going on, Finland?
It's fair.
But maybe that's just me being a big softy.
A little bit, probably.
Probably a little bit. Darn you, Canada. Well, hey, speaking of senseless death, let's talk about history a little bit. I know we were talking about this yesterday, about how, exploration, the idea of going to these uncharted lands, is so primal to the imagination of an adventure. But then you get there and it's full of monsters, and a lot of them talk and they have money, and it's like, well, like, what are we doing here? Are we moving into the unknown, or are we, colonialist monsters who are pillaging these poor goblins, or
The answer is the second thing.
Probably.
I don't think there's like a soft way to say it, and I think it's kind of the unspoken problem of the tabletop role-playing game scene, like, is that all this, let's call it spade a spade, Eurocentric fantasy, kind of malaise that is general Dungeons and Dragons, and most of the retro clones in that wake are baked off of that same kind of. I think somebody said it the other day. It's like basic Dungeons and Dragons is like a Western.
Interesting.
Right. And in the Western, there are clearly good guys and there are clearly bad guys.
Yeah.
And it's not who you would think. Because realistically, the bad guys in that scene were the cowboys.
Yeah.
and the good guys were the indigenous trying to protect their families. And that's not how it was portrayed.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what the Western is. And so the story of Dungeons and Dragons is that template.
Okay.
It's these adventurers are out here conquering this wild and lawless land.
Yeah.
The people who were here before are savages
Or
and need to
gone.
be destroyed.
Yeah.
Or gone.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. But like even in the scenario where they're gone, the monsters that you find that have been left behind
Are still the rightful. Yeah.
everybody's kind of got a right to live.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
well, it's an interesting thing. I've been thinking a lot lately about like the Valley of the Kings, kind of like the sort of like I forget the name of the British thief who chartered that expedition, but like the excavation of Tutankhamun's tomb. Like to me, that is such a juicy RPG thing where it's like, you're going out into a hostile wilderness. You have your crew of dudes with you who are there to, hold your torches and support you. And you're cracking through this, door with a big curse on it. And you're finding these 2,000-year-old artifacts. And it's like, on one hand, that's, in my opinion, pretty fucking awesome. On the other hand, it's straight up, you're looting, you're tomb looting, right? You're stealing another culture's archaeological heritage, transporting it to a place where it will not be taken care of very well. And the British Museum is notorious for mistreating these artifacts. Uh, and so I think it's kind of just interesting being like, should titter pigs, should TTRPGs, do they have a duty to be moral, or is there something inoculatory about taking these kinds of like, historical rough patches in our species morality, and kind of finding ways to like recapitulate them into something, defanged, not harmful to anybody, and making play out of it. Like, what do you think about that?
that's a good question. I don't know that like I don't know if there's an answer that fits
Table.
everybody. Like, yeah, and I mean like that's kind of what it comes down to, right? It's like what are you trying to do at your table?
Hmm.
If you're just trying to have fun, kicking down doors and beating up monsters, then kick down doors and beat up monsters. You do that in any video game, nobody bats an eyelash at the moral complications of beating up goblins.
Yeah.
Like, fine,
Hmm.
that's your table. Have a good time. If you have a table where you're literally like trying to embrace the ideas of colonialism, racism, or fascism, and spread those ideas through your table via a game because you think that shit's cool, then fuck you, die
Yeah.
in a fire. Don't ever touch the books that you have, and please, like, actually,
Choke on
go
it and
away. Yeah,
die.
like, um, that said, I've desperately wanted to run a game where the world is a fascist dictatorship dystopia,
Hmm.
and the PCs are, you know, like revolutionaries trying to stay alive and kind of, mostly escape,
Yeah.
but like in a world where they're treated as the bad guys,
Hmm.
right? Because that's kind of what that is.
It's interesting to me that you bring up fascism because I've always thought there's something about fascism as a political philosophy which is just so larpy, like it's like I'm gonna put on my little fascist clothes and I'm gonna go march with my little friends, and we're gonna like I'm the Superman, tomorrow belongs to me. Like it's just like it's so
It's very
goofy.
theatrical.
Yeah, but it's
Yeah.
power, power fantasy. Like, I think, D- I'm not going to quote him directly because he was kind of being an asshole when he said it, but David Bowie kind of pointed out, like Nazism as a political philosophy is intensely performative. Like you know, it's a way to convince mediocre people that they are at the forefront of history. And I think, when applied to politics, that's horrifying. But speaking as a mediocre person, I occasionally like to pretend that I have, some sort of impact on the world. And I think, power fantasy has kind of become a dirty word, but like if you eat shit for minimum wage 40 hours a week, I say kick down that door, fucking slay that dragon, take that money, get that paper.
Yeah.
Like,
No, absolutely. Yeah, that's kind of what I was saying. It's like, for your table, like have the moments you need to have
Yeah.
to enjoy the evening that you want to enjoy.
Yeah.
I think if you're taking anything you learn from that scenario out into the world and trying to use that to inform how you treat other people, probably should check your
Go
shit to
see a
go see a
therapist.
therapist.
Call your mother.
Exactly. Like that said, I think that role playing games have a unique faculty in them to explore hard topics.
Yeah.
And I think with the right consent and the right agency and the right tools, you can explore almost any topic in a
Mm-hmm.
TTRPG and get somewhere.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're going to get where you want to go or if you're going to get out of it what you think you might. And that's risky, and it's you probably don't want to do it in public. You probably don't want to do it on stream.
Mm.
I think that's kind of where the real line is at this point. Is there's a certain parasocial contract of somewhere between virtue signaling and trying to prevent trauma.
Yeah.
That is like how much of this stuff needs to be on the internet. Like the weird thing is that we live in a world that just nobody shuts up anymore, right? It's
Yeah.
Ben Burnham's like, can
Poker.
anybody? Oh yeah, Bo Burnham. Yes, sorry. Can anybody just shut the fuck up?
I don't
And
know what
no,
you're saying. Why aren't you?
right? And like here we are,
Yeah.
trying to talk about this stuff. Um, and the reason is we want attention, so that people will buy our stupid books.
That would help. Bye.
Buy, buy, or we'll keep doing this.
Do it again too. Yeah.
They make great gifts.
The longer we're broke, the more podcasts there will be.
Exactly.
This is your final warning.
It's your final.
I say that we're gonna say it every time. Yeah. So shall we?
So I think there were a bunch of kind of historical problems. Like you tapped into a couple of them, like kind of colonialism,
Yeah.
the monstrosity of tomb robbing, and how the analogs are there. But I think when we kind of were going over some of this conversation, there were some other anachronisms that were like holdovers that are like not really historical. They're like modern.
Yeah.
That we find in Dungeons and Dragons that are just as problematic and maybe worse.
Kind of.
And one of them we were talking about was the police state.
Yeah.
Like the city guard.
Yeah, that's such an interesting thing too with hex crawls and sandboxes, because I feel like when you're like, here's the map, here are your options, go nuts. It's usually only a matter of time before somebody, there's some sort of disagreement in town or and then as a DM, it's like, okay, well, this player is, they robbed the sword shop. I don't know.
Right. My party showed up and they wrecked my town.
Yeah.
Whatever it is. They killed the baker.
I made the mistake of having a town adventure because I'm an idiot. And I didn't learn the first 5 times I ran town games and they fucking ended in disaster. But I did it again and here we are. And so now once again, I'm calling for the town guard.
Right.
And that is just...
First of all, disabuse people. In medieval Europe, there was no town guard.
Yeah.
This did not exist.
Policing as a concept is barely 200 years old. Like
barely 300. I think it's like it's a little over 200 now.
Well, I think like Robert Peel, you would say like late 1800s, and then like before that, you have like bounty hunters and like in America, worse things.
Lawmen.
Yeah. Anyway,
the Shire Reeve. The Shire Reeve is a good example, right? So like in Scotland, even in the 16th century, you had the Shire Reeve, which was like kind of a knockoff chieftain who could resolve like local
You're supposed
disputes.
To protect the king's forests and
right. But largely a tax collector.
Yeah.
Right. Tax collector and enforcer.
And I think that's interesting too, because like, the idea that like if you're sitting around, if it's the year 800 and you're sitting around in England and some four strangely dressed, mutant murder hobos show up in your town and hello, and start causing trouble, like you don't go, nobody calls the cops. There's no cops to call, right? You go out into the street and you say, hey, there's strangers in our town. and the local children pick up a handful of rocks and they come throw rocks at you.
Everybody,
Everybody, the
everybody
whole
who
town,
can
yeah.
comes with rocks.
They're like, oh, Joseph's cousin got punched in the tavern. Like, everybody, come on, we got strangers
We're
here.
being attacked.
And in the event that those murder hobos are too strong to be repelled by rocks, then in that case, you got to go to the local lord and you got to pitch him on getting him. You know what I mean? Like, there's somebody in your property, messing up the dudes who work for you. Like, please get involved. And they would be like, oh, I don't know, I'll think about it. Like, it's to me, it's so much more interesting to ground those things in the historical reality of it. Because I think when you kind of go like, oh yeah, it's town guards, like, one town guard is such a, like, it's like, oh yeah, goblins or rats, or it's the, like, oh, what are these guys? They're mooks. They were generated at the guard station and they tropped out to fight you, and as soon as they're gone, no one will mourn them. Like, and it's ridiculous. I think it's way more interesting to be like, oh, you causing trouble in town? Some old lady is throwing tomatoes at you. Like, you gonna start shit with the old lady?
Right. No, I love that.
How
That's
far
actually
is
great.
this gonna go?
It's a group of 5 children who are throwing rocks at you.
Yeah,
They do 1 point of damage around each round,
and you deserve it.
and you deserve it. What are you going to do?
Yeah,
No, I love that. I think that's a genius idea. I think that kind of taps into the, like, yes, be like, if you're going to do historical fantasy, try and be more historical than fantasy, at least in regards to perspectives of the law, and maybe
yeah.
perspectives of economy. I think
Oh
one of the
yeah,
other things we were talking about was, like, how the gold, silver, copper standard of
yeah.
things, and, like,
Cash
the
money.
kind of Forgotten Realms version of just walking in and buying, like, magic items, and
Yeah,
everything is a fucking supermarket, like,
yeah. As
it's
opposed to the, like, I want you to forge a sword for me. Like, all right, well, give me the money and I'll be 2 months, and
right,
then here's your sword that you know what I mean,
right,
built for you.
exactly.
Instead,
Or,
it's
what can
like,
I buy here?
yeah,
Turnips.
yeah, right,
How much? Ask the Lord.
yeah,
He owns them all.
yeah.
You can't buy turnips here. You have to buy them from him.
One of the things I think is even just interesting is, like, the cash economy thing is one thing, as opposed to, like, trade in kind or, like, wealth as land. But the like the idea of shops and markets is so interesting to me, because it's like the idea that I can walk into a store and buy what I need is a very modern thing.
Very
Like,
modern.
and in just like, in Pillars of the Earth, I was reading a little while ago. Great book, check it out. Ken Follett. Uh, like, kind of like a major part of the plot hinges on the fact that this woman can only go to market to sell her wool. There's a market every 2 weeks, and that's when the market is. And otherwise, the town is like a church and maybe 3 houses, and
Right.
like,
Yeah. Well, market used to be an event.
yeah,
It wasn't a place. It
yeah,
was an event that happened where traders would come, and it was usually when all the traders were in town.
yeah,
So you'd have people from different places coming to a single place, and the people who could go to a market were largely middle class. They were
burgers
yeah,
or
they
sort of
had
mercantile.
some kind of, what do they call it, some kind of pedigree, enough to,
Yeah,
not be serfs.
yeah, they weren't bound to the land or whatever.
Right.
Um, Yeah, I mean, that feudal class dynamic, I think, is so interesting to me, because you never see it. You know
You
what I
never see it.
mean? Like, and it's alien almost. Like, it's hard to kind of wrap your head around when you're like, oh, like we were talking the other day about how D&D is like kind of just presumes the separation of church and state.
Right.
There's a king and then there's some high priests, and never the twain shall meet. And it's, you look at history, and if you're a king, you
Your
know,
job is praying.
your job is to publicly travel the country and pray so that people are content, that they know that there's a connection between the state and the heavens. Like, we're talking about the god king, like pharaohs in ancient
Right.
Egypt, or like the
Divine
divine
right to rule.
divine right to rule, Chinese imperial, mandate of heaven stuff. Like,
Mhm.
anywhere you see, autocracy, anywhere you see autocracy in human history, it's always buttressed by, some form of religion, or in the 20th century, ideology, or whatever you want to call
Right.
it. Um, but like, I think it's just like that one's really interesting. We were talking the other day too about the movie The Last Duel, and I was saying how much I enjoyed that movie just because I feel like Ben Affleck's character in that really kind of is one of the very few feudal characters I've ever seen on screen. You know, like normally you see it and it's like, oh yeah, he's a lord, he commands his armies, he rules his little area. And in Last Duel, it's like, no, he's a rich party boy who wants to screw around and drink. And unfortunately, he's got to spend his time managing the loose band of killers that his father put together to steal this threat. You know what I mean? Like it's just like that's not something that you get in D&D a lot.
Yeah, I think it's underrepresented, and probably for relatively good reason, right? In that, again, it comes down to what's the story you're trying to tell.
Yeah.
And I feel like a lot of this stuff, it's kind of like the why is there always a town guard? Why is
Yeah.
the currency always late stage capitalism? And the answer is because it requires less explanation.
Yeah.
I don't have to get the players from their current worldview all the way over to this other alien worldview
Mm-hmm.
before we can start playing.
Yeah.
So I think if anything, that's like in my mind that kind of gives it a pass
Sure.
in that like if you want to explore those ideas, yeah, I think you absolutely should. But I get it,
Yeah.
right? That if you're gonna just do the Forgotten Realms
It's
platinum
tough.
coins,
We're all alienated from our history too, right?
right.
Like,
That said, I think that if you were gonna explore different ideologies about law and economics, a fun way to do it is to really dig into the elves and the dwarves and the different,
yeah,
like, how does a different race or species, how does the differences between us and them inform
yeah.
what's valuable and why and for how long and how they do things and how they think about things. And I think we were thinking about like, what is the elves relationship to the law?
No, interesting.
Like, how is law enforcement done in the elven kingdoms with elves?
Yeah, I do like to run. I do like to run my dwarves in my games as very like ultra Soviet like. Like what is your race? Dwarf. What is your nation? Dwarf. What is your gender? Dwarf. What
Yeah,
is your religion? Dwarf. Like the highest crime being undwarfly. Like you know what I
yeah,
mean? Like uh I do think that those, oh, geez, here's an anachronistic term for you, demi-humans. I do think those non-human player races should be as alien as possible. I really really like that. It's one of the reasons I like OD&D, like races class stuff. I think it makes them feel a little more special, a little more inhuman. But also, I like things like in our home game, our bar hat game, we decided that elves don't decay. They don't have souls. They're not connected to the natural cycle of the world. So when you find a dead elf in a dungeon, they kind of just look like they're sleeping.
yeah.
They're slightly glowing, perfect mockeries of people that do not rot because bacteria knows better than to touch that shit.
That's
Um,
pretty cool.
yeah, I mean, it helps make them special and weird,
It's
and
rich world building, I think.
yeah.
And I one of the things I've always adored about your world building is that it always leaves more questions than answers.
Oh, thank
It always makes you wonder, like, why are things that way? And there's no answer. There's no
you.
good answer. It's just
Oh,
it's the
there's
way it is. It's
answers.
creepy.
You got to dig deeper, man. There's always good answers there. Well, yeah, I mean, yes, these. I do think that there are, without kind of getting too into the nitty gritty of like having to, educate your players, giving a little history lecture at the beginning of each game session. I do think there's a ton of great things you can pull out of the past, though. Like I think those peripatetic, like a praying monarch, the traveling praying monarch,
Yeah.
is such an interesting thing to me. I love the idea of having lords and monarchs who are not chosen
Yeah.
by merit. They're not capable commanders. The local lord, he's an 8-year-old kid,
Yeah.
total asshole.
Yeah.
Never known a day of responsibility in his life. He's just terrorizing the countryside.
Just like the real lords and ladies of our
Yeah.
past.
Well, no, but I think there's a lot of good too. We were talking the other day kind of about, there's the two kinds of D&D where there's the god has chosen the king and he rules a just kingdom that is being disrupted by goblins or whatever.
Right.
And you have to defend what is right by flushing out what is bad, or
The
the king
world
is
is
an
bad.
asshole,
Yeah.
which realism. And you are the insurgent force that needs to break things up and build a new status quo. You need to disrupt the paradigm. And one of, like, obviously for sandboxes and stuff, it's a hell of a lot better if the world is bad.
Yeah.
Because it kind of lets you pick your targets a little. It's not an original thought. People have been saying that for a while, but uh, I do kind of want to make an argument, though, for the gray area of that. I think a little bit. I think it's fun occasionally to be like, yeah, the local lord is an 8-year-old boy who spends his spare time pulling the wings off of flies and is going to grow up to be an even bigger asshole than he is now. But if something, if you kill him or you cure him or you whatever, his uncle is going to take that throne, and he's an even bigger asshole. Like, I like those kind of like it
Difficult choices.
difficult choices. I never want to veer into grimdark, but I do. I love a campaign that has a what I consider to be a realistic political structure, where it's like, oh yeah, like the guys in charge are incompetents, boneheads and bastards, as Will Ferguson would say.
Yeah.
Uh, but if you get rid of them, you know, you have to deal with what comes next, and it's there's no gentle way to change the world, right?
Yeah, I think that's been one of the most interesting things about playing the Pixels and Pagans game for as long as we have,
Mm-hmm.
is that really started off as the end of an empire,
Yeah.
and then kind of watching the world fall into this kind of, just thousand wars,
Mm-hmm.
of varying degrees of severity, with kind of a major villain
Yeah.
at the head of the closest thing that you've dealt with. But even he is in contention for power with his church.
Yeah.
It's not clear who's running things, right?
Yeah.
It's not clear where the power is coming from. And in a world where you've got, the potential for a theocracy, why wouldn't they run things? Well, war's deadly.
Yeah.
The church can keep its hands clean and can keep all the money and the power, and let these warrior kings do their thing and
Mm-hmm.
be out there in the battlefields dying. So yeah, I think there's a lot of really fun. Yeah, again, reaching into history to get at some of that stuff, but then even reaching into the history of other cultures, I think, and finding some juicy nuggets. You had told me about, and I think I read about it in the
Dawn of
Dawn
Everything.
of Dawn of Everything.
Yeah.
Uh,
Graybird and Wengrow.
yeah, and it talks about how in this one culture, I'm not going to be able to remember the exact details of it. But the police, how they do law enforcement,
Mm-hmm.
is clowns.
Yeah.
It's an entertainment. It's a theater.
Yeah.
And if you kind of squint your eyes and look at how policing is done in the modern world, the same. There's an outfit to it. There's a costume.
Yeah.
There's a certain you're buying into this moment of complete unbelievability. The idea that a police officer has any real authority, moral or otherwise, over you is absurd.
Mm-hmm.
You would treat that person like a criminal if they were to do any of the things that police normally do.
Yeah. Well, it's like, like, what do you call a guy who walks into a school wearing a gun? It's a cop.
It's a cop,
Yeah. Like,
unless it's not.
yeah.
And then,
Um,
so
but
yeah, I like that. I really love that idea of like taking that to an extreme
mm-hmm.
of, when the town guard shows up, it's not some guys with spears and
It's
their
not a
crossbows.
professionalized core of.
It's not a military force.
Yeah.
It's a group of bards, and they
Yeah.
come in and they theatrically declare you this,
Yeah.
and there's music and there's thundering and everybody does a little dance, and you guys, if you're local, you know what you're supposed to do now,
Yeah.
and if you're not,
You're
you're gonna have to get
confused out of town by the.
yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I do think that kind of like melding of different cultures can be a really, really rich um, way to world build, to kind of say, because just some of the assumptions, like the and Dawn of Everything is a great book for this because I feel like it really turns a lot of assumptions about history on its head. But like, it's so easy to get locked up in the paradigm of like, yeah, like, the state is naturally an outcome of the intersection of violence and commerce. And it's like, well, like, yes, but also not always. Like, like there are historical incidences where like, that was not the case. And I think exploring that in RPGs is pretty cool.
And exploring it at all
Yeah.
is pretty cool. RPGs happens to be one of those places where you can explore it critically
Mm-hmm.
with your decisions having an impact. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's really got the juice in it to explore like
Mm-hmm.
the consequences of things like that, which I think is really cool.
Well, too, I mean, TTRPGs by their very nature are so innately collaborative that like it's really at odds to like the competition forward kind of like viewpoint that our society has or predominates in our society. And I think like on one hand, I think it's wonderful that one of the most popular games we have is a cooperative game, and that this game has endured for 60 years, and that at its core it is about different people with different skill sets coming together to do something bigger than any one of them is awesome. uh, but often the way that that's represented is it's funneled through well, the four of you are in competition against whoever has your money. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like, uh, so I don't know. I think that mixing that up is a really fertile ground for things. Now, you were talking briefly about Pixels and Pagans, and about uh, Vedivir, Von Aspian. No, not Von Aspian, De Aspian, right?
Baron Bedivere,
Of Aspian.
Daspian, yeah.
Yeah. One of my favorite villains that I've ever PC'd against. I feel like I'm playing a noble tiefling sorcerer who has sworn a blood vendetta on this dude for essentially holding him to the same legal principles as everybody else. He's like, but I'm rich. Like, I clearly you can't hold me to account for my actions. Like, uh,
I'm a rich white guy just like you. This is not what the law is used for,
he's
my man.
blue, but
That's your problem.
same. Yeah, right. Uh, Fool.
Gets them every
I
time.
thought money mattered more than skin color. Um, but it's been interesting in that campaign because it's like, okay, I'm playing a lawful evil character, but like it is one of those, the world is evil and you are disrupting it things. So
I think what I like, one of my favorite things about Pixels and Pagans is that the world is as big as your perceptions of it are.
yeah.
So yeah, the local lord is the Baron of Aspian,
Mm-hmm.
who happens to be this jerk.
Yeah.
There's another regional lord, jerk in his own way.
Yeah.
There's the decaying Telbian Empire,
Yeah.
like which has kind of fallen over and is now being like picked over by
Yeah.
these kind of local warlords, of which Baron Aspian is one. And all the people picking over that, from the clergy down to the beggar, are in it for themselves. And so, like, yeah, your worldview, even as a hero in this context, is, oh my god, what a shit show.
Mm-hmm.
The world is evil, not because the world is evil, but because the world's trying to kill everyone.
Yeah.
And that's, I love that kind of storytelling.
Yeah. I like that kind of stuff too. I feel like there's a real temptation. Like we've talked a lot about how in fifth edition, if you are a fifth level sorcerer, you are a B-52 bomber.
Yeah.
If you can cast fly and fireball, then the medieval world is not prepared to deal with your bullshit. Like, especially if you have a bag of holding, which I mean, we spent a good part of this campaign stuffing that bag of holding with barrels of oil and then threatening to fly over fields of wheat, drop the oil, fireball them, and fly away, and kind of just wage an insurgent war that way. But like, I don't know. We kind of like, I feel like we ran into kind of like the realism barrier a little bit, where we were like, well, ultimately, this is a game where I'm not the only player. And we all want to be killing monsters and getting treasure. And, these kinds of like insurgent campaigns are not really germane to that. You know what I mean?
Well, and also, like, one of the things I like about Dungeons and Dragons is that because the supernatural is an element,
Mm-hmm.
and like you're not the only wizard,
Yeah.
right? You're not the only fourth level sorcerer in the
Someone's going to
place.
hit your fly with counterspell and
well, yeah, go go nuke the fields. Go kill off all the peasants. Aspian doesn't care.
he's got
His power,
necromancers.
right? His power comes from an island
Mm-hmm.
offshore where he has a fucking death god,
Yeah.
captured.
Mm-hmm.
Has anybody found that? No. Have you been close? Yes. Did you almost die? Yes, every
Yeah.
time. So, like, yeah, there's bigger threats in the world. There's bigger supernatural things in the world that if you could take them out, they might move those pieces.
Mm-hmm.
What's he using it for? He's using it to maintain an army of the undead so that he can win his wars,
Yeah.
so that he can keep his land, so that he can.
And his own immortality, I think, right?
Yeah, he's got a couple of chips in that. Yeah.
So we were talking the other day about when these realism questions of anachronism and supply lines and the politics and the economy and when all this kind of
Racism against orcs. Racism.
yeah
It's it. All the bad things in real life
yeah
are in the game
sure
if you want, or or
crazy all the
go
time.
crazy all
Yeah.
the time. This is why we love Troika so
Troika's
goddamn
great,
much.
because I feel like when it becomes difficult to hold up that kind of those realism things where you're like, oh yeah, there's a lord, there's peasants, there's this town exports wheat, and it's like sometimes you got to be like, you know what, this town eats these people are cursed and they eat bad dreams, so they're going to bring you into their town, they're going to feed you a bunch of milk before bedtime, and they're going to fuck with you while you sleep. Like I think that's just the one of the best ways to sort of short circuit that, like, you know, is it right to murder things and take their money? It's like, I don't know. This baby doubles in size every 6 hours. How are you going to deal with that? This baby's going to be a hill giant on Monday. You ready for that? He's going to be a titan on Wednesday. Like, if you get him now, he's an ogre. Get it while it's hot. Like,
Yeah.
it's
Is it a baby? Technically, yes.
yeah. It's
Is
also
it gonna?
going
It's gonna
to
crush the world.
start taking dookies that will drown your entire family. Like, uh, and I think just getting weird, like throwing those kinds of absurdist fantasy things out, uh, really helps with that sort of stuff. It's like you were saying about bar hack. You were kind of like, why do these things happen? Like, I have more questions than answers. Like, and I think those are great. Like, if you want to follow those down the rabbit hole, if you want to pull those threads, collaboratively as a table of 5 players, we're going to find something rich there. Somebody's going to say something, or I'm going to have an idea, or whatever. It doesn't matter. But it does kind of give you those outs from being like, yeah, like, this is a game about violence, and it's a game about materialism. It's, we fetishize these weapons, we fetishize, the things we're looting from, sentient or non-sentient or magical endangered species. Like, I feel like we didn't even talk about, like, it's the last dragon, kill it with fire.
Yeah.
uh
You better hope.
yeah, but I think when you're like, oh yeah, like a Doom Desert. Let's take it back to the very first module we did together. I feel like it was a great way to talk about addiction, which is a serious fucking issue. It's stolen people from me. I'm sure it has for you
That
too.
almost stole me.
Yeah,
Eh,
right.
not from you, but
No, it's you've been pretty good since I met you.
yeah.
Uh, but yeah, I mean, I like
Yeah, no, addiction's a serious topic,
addiction's a
and
serious topic, and it
you were, I think, able to make an adventure that allows people to explore the
yeah,
topic of addiction
and it,
or
it
not. Like,
yeah,
it's okay to play the game as just a game,
yeah.
but it is also cool that you can explore that topic.
I feel like when you start throwing things in, like you've been sucked inside a magical bottle, and now the sun is a sun-headed gecko which climbs the walls of the bottle. Like, makes it all go. It's a spoonful of sugar to make it all go down easier.
Yeah.
Um, I'm reminded of Juzo Atami, who directed my favorite movie. I think that's his name. Tampopo. Have you seen this?
No.
No, we should watch it. You'd like it. It's about food.
Okay.
Um,
Oh, wait a minute. Is that bread?
No.
Okay.
You're thinking of Yakitate Japan, which is my other Japanese food show I love. But anyway, Tampopo is an amazing film. It's all about food, and it's incredibly subversive in a way that most people will watch it and never think twice about. They'll see that it's about food, and they'll be like, "Oh, this is a Japanese movie about food." And if you watch it closely, you're like, "Well, actually, all of this food they're all Japanese dishes, but they're all from other things. It's Chinese food, it's Korean food, it's Western food. It's about how, Japanese culture, which is considered to be this monolithic, endogenous kind of like, foreigner pushing out kind of holy thing, is really, it's a world culture thing, you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
he said about that film, he said, my movies are poison. So I have to mix them with sugar so that people will eat them. Which I think is just a really, really beautiful and amazing and great thing to say about any kind of art. Um,
Yeah.
and I think more DMs should embrace that. I think that,
Be
if
poisonous
be poisonous, but
and
be
coat
sweet.
yourself in sugar.
Yeah, right? I mean, come up with something really, like, just take whatever is bugging you about the world, make a way to punch it in the face, and then throw in a sun-headed gecko to keep it fun. That's my advice.
It's really good advice. Damn. Yeah. That's really good advice. Yeah, it's weird that you say that because I feel like I've always felt that way about the way that I like to run D&D. It's
Hmm.
always I've got some pointed stuff I'm trying to say about the world,
Yeah,
whether or not the PCs pick up on that
yeah.
metaphor or
Doesn't
not.
matter.
It's kind of for me.
Yeah,
Um, Usually, at least one of them will go like, "Wow, okay, I guess there's some deeper shit there." Uh, but I don't know. I guess I had always expected that that was a me thing. I didn't know that that was like a you thing.
yeah.
First of all, and I guess maybe it's in all of us. If you're a weirdo DM and you like want to change the world, man, yeah,
Do it.
put it in your game,
Yeah.
and then put something weird next to it so it doesn't look too off to your Republican fighter.
Yeah. Yeah. How do I get my cousin to play this game?
We played with your cousin. Your cousin was cool.
I have a legion of cousins. They're
Oh,
not
okay.
they're a wide and various group.
The entire spectrum.
We're a feudal clan unto ourselves. Yeah.
Cool.
Well,
Yeah, I think that was all the topics we wanted to cover.
yeah, we covered hex crawling, we
Yeah.
covered exploration, history, anachronism, absurdism. It's been
Use
good.
absurdity to overcome problematic
Yeah.
topics if you can.
Yeah.
If you're trying to tackle problematic topics, maybe put some absurdism next to it
I think it's
so
helps
that
a lot.
you can get past the
And also even just things like, like how is it that we have like a medieval outlook on society, but we have, Renaissance technology like plate mail and, maybe firearms, depending on what you're playing, if you're playing Pathfinder, like
yeah.
how do you square those things? Don't fucking,
Make it weirder.
yeah, it's because the triangle headed queen with 17 eyes decreed it so, obviously. Like,
Yeah.
if you have a problem with it, you have to cross the mountains of foreboding and take it up with her, you know?
Plate mail is so hard to hit because it's made of porcelain and nobody wants to break the porcelain.
That's our next food module is you have literal plate armor and you eat off it like an otter. There you go.
I love it.
All right.
All right,
This has
cool.
been Adventurous Weirdos.
Yeah, signing off.
Signing off, Austin Holm.
Gabriel Hernandez.
Bye,
Thanks.
James.
We'll
Buy
see
our
you
stuff.
next week, I think.
See you next week.